They could have been anything that they wanted to be. It just turned out that they were good at being bad. But that doesn't mean they can't try and be good. Some genres aren't meant for kids. But fortunately, some filmmakers take that as a challenge and do something completely bonkers, like a musical about mobsters played by kids who shoot balls of whipped cream at each other. And other times you get a weekend-topping adaptation of a popular children's picture book. Then you have the good guys. No, it's the bad guys. I think the writer made a mistake. Let's track the path from a set of comics to a hit movie.
Let's do this.
Now, before the bad guys had to go good, their creator had to make a few of his own stabs at who he is versus who people thought he was. Creator Aaron Blabey has had a very relatable problem for a lot of people. He was unsatisfied with where his life was going, and he has tried a lot of different directions. Blabey told Mark Maron on his WTF podcast that it was movies like American Werewolf in London that he inadvertently wound up showing a gathering of 14-year-olds when he was a kid, and Empire Strikes Back that made him think that perhaps acting was where it was at for him. In what will become a pattern, he got his wish. After being seen in a high school play, he was cast in an Australian TV show where he won a Newcomer Award. Without much formal training, he managed to sustain an acting career for a decade before realizing it wasn't for him. He turned to art and was able to get some gallery showings early on because, I don't know, maybe he has a genie that we don't know about, but that didn't ultimately fill the void that he was trying to. After a bit of graphic design work and marketing to make some money, he was able to get an art teaching job. Still not feeling it, he finally turned to writing and was able to get 5 semi-autobiographical books published, because at this point, why not? But none of them quite took off. The arrival of his first child prompted him to take one last stab at lining up artistic fulfillment and having an income. He went for a walk and came up with the idea for Pig the Pug, Thelma the Unicorn, and The Bad Guys, which would be the 3 titles that would take off for the author, primarily from Scholastic Book Club sales, thus saving him a life of what he called a life of surrendered dreams, low-level corporate creativity, and mundane compromise. Part of the process for development of Blabey's stories of bad guys breaking good and also avoiding life as a marketing graphic artist was to do tours reading books to kids in schools, libraries, and for clubs. Now, while initially he was able to base things on what his sons enjoyed, they began to age out of the target range, though they still liked the books. By taking the show on the road, however, he got a rare opportunity for an author. He was able to gauge the reactions to the work in real time. Generally speaking, it's hard enough to get someone to read a work in progress, and they generally frown on you staring at them while they do. I know, I've tried. He found the immediate feedback invaluable. Blabey had a big love for movies that had additionally pushed him into trying acting. And while the acting bug didn't stick, the stories he would see on the big screen would. One of the clearest influences for the books, and by extension the movie, was Quentin Tarantino's debut film, Reservoir Dogs. It wouldn't be until Pulp Fiction that Tarantino became a household name. The way to tell if the guy hitting on you is a first-year film major, because that's all he'll talk about. Blabey happened upon Reservoir Dogs on the weekend it was released, and was so taken with it that he went back 5 times. The cover of the first issue is itself a tribute to the poster for Reservoir Dogs, with the 4 characters, Tarantula came in the second issue, walking forward in black suits and narrow black ties. Another big influence for Blabey, and also a lot of Australians, was Mad Max, telling Mark Maron that it was the first time that a place that they knew was on an international stage. This influence is seen in the black muscle car that they make their getaways in, that's reminiscent of the Pursuit Special, which was built from a 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT, already a favored muscle car in Australia. Blabey refers to the bad guys as Tarantino for kids, trying to make the heist and crime comic with the kind of things that children liked, looking at what his then 6- and 8-year-old sons, as well as remember what he liked at the time. The film was the effort of a first-time director with the impossibly French name Pierre Parifel. The animator had joined DreamWorks working on Kung Fu Panda. He was immediately taken with the Reservoir Dogs reference on the cover of the first issue and strove to convert that to the film, which ultimately included an opening scene in the mold of the opening of Pulp Fiction. Parifel and Blaiby also looked at movies from Guy Ritchie like Snatch for the way that they're cut to the music and have a fast-moving feel. For the art styles, he naturally drew from French cartoonists like Albert Uderzo, famed co-creator of the series Astérix, and André Franquin, specifically his work on the comic Gaston. He aimed to mix those influences with anime sources like the work of Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama, as well as shows like Lupin III and Cowboy Bebop. These influences also translated into the character design. The source material had a rougher aesthetic, with black and white line drawings that would not have translated well to computer animation. He still wanted to maintain the art book look, breaking away from the increasingly detailed 3D animation tools. Rather, they had to create new tools that would remove detail from the 3D animation where the focus has been increasing detail. That was in an effort to give it more of a 2D cel-painted feel, which was so successful in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. The first draft of the script didn't include the heist element that was at the core of the final film. In order to convey what he was hoping to do with the movie, he created a short bit of what eventually became the opening chase sequence. The setting for both the comic series and the movie is an unnamed fictional city in a fictional world. Now naturally, it's got a talking fox, snake, tarantula, shark, and piranha who all interact with humans, and that's not the part that bothers everybody. For the movie, however, Parifel wanted to pay a little tribute to the city that had been his home since moving to the US. Much of the look for the movie is influenced by the neo-noir films of the late 60s and early 70s, many of which used Los Angeles as a backdrop, making its features, in some ways, synonymous with the genre. Now, while no single buildings or landmarks were replicated outside of the LA River that serves as a car chase venue for many movies, residents would be able to recognize the downtown or DTLA area as well as Midtown and Echo Park, the latter being the home of the Torettos from the Fast and the Furious. Though now you'd need to be a high-stakes highway heist team to afford to live there.
Everyone say robbery!
Robbery!
Now, while physical production had to sit on the sidelines for a bit until they could come up with new protocols for Tom Cruise to yell at people for not following, animation had the distinction of being able to create with people in their own spaces. Even the dialogue can be recorded individually, but since acting is reliant on the give and the take from the actors, whenever possible, directors like to have the actors in the same space. The solution to the problem of how to record people who can't travel or be indoors with people managed to solve a problem that arises with ensemble recordings. When the actors start to improvise and play off of each other, they also tend to start talking over each other. This creates a difficulty in animation because they often rely on the finer details of the recordings to suit the scene. If actors talk over each other, both mics pick it up and they can't be moved individually. To get the recordings for people who weren't close, they used home studios or even recording setups that production sent them. The sessions were then conducted over Zoom where they could play off of each other and overlap, but the individual recordings would be distinct and adjusted as needed. The only two who were regularly able to record together were Sam Rockwell and Mark Maron, with Maron living only 8 minutes from DreamWorks.
For me, it was DreamWorks was literally an 8-minute drive from my house.
It wasn't just the locations and the color palettes and the storylines that were meant to evoke crime stories of the 70s. Composer Daniel Pemberton had his own series of movies to draw inspiration from. Jazz composers like Quincy Jones, who scored Michael Caine vehicle The Italian Job, and Lalo Schifrin, who scored the car chase classic Bullet, where they blended jazz, pop, and Latin influences, or David Shire's score for The Taking of Pelham 123.
Isn't that wonderful?
To achieve that feel, Pemberton employed instrumentation associated with the time, like the Hammond B3 organ and the Moog synthesizer. That's the one where sounds are generated by patching wires to shape the sound wave of the tones. It's crazy stuff. Now, while The Good Guys is not a musical, there is a standout musical number set piece in it, but that wasn't the original plan. However, they had cast Anthony Ramos as Mr. Piranha. Ramos comes from Broadway, specifically the musicals of Lin-Manuel Miranda, including the lead in the film adaptation of In the Heights. That's the one that's about the guy who created the American banking system, spoiler alert, who died in a duel. Seems like a waste not to have him sing something, so they talked to Ramos and Pemberton about creating a song that had to shift narrative purpose from distraction to the thesis of the film that you shouldn't judge people based on how they look, to a climax meant to crowd the dance floor. Continuing the theme of the power of a good walk, Pemberton and lyricist Gary Go figured out the lyrics while taking a walk from Pemberton's London studio. Now, what is the point of having a big song if it's not going to include a little dancing? Thanks to the, everything of the last couple years, Sam Rockwell and Zazie Beetz couldn't get together to work out what their dance routine might be, but Rockwell had someone he could call. Rockwell had recently starred in a biopic about legendary choreographer Bob Fosse in Fosse/Verdun with choreographer Susan Misner. Rockwell suggested that Misner be brought in to choreograph the big dance and some of the character movements.
They got Susie Meisner, who choreographed Fosse Verdun, so Susie put it together.
In a featurette for the film, Misner talked about the freedom of choreographing for characters that don't actually exist, though that did put a strain on the real-life dancers who would demonstrate the choreography as reference for the artists. You have to be a little bad before you can be good. Those characters that were born good, like Superman and Captain America, might be great heroes, but you can't shake the feeling that they remind you of the kid that would ask if there was homework. No one liked that kid.